Hi, this is Delene with McDonald's Sewing and Vacuum, and today I'm going to do a little tutorial for you on the Kimberbell Fill in the Blanks program. This is the January project, and it's called Sparkle Like You Mean It. And I have a little kit that if you are watching this video, you will have gotten a kit like this. And in the kit, there's some felt, little pieces of fabric, some glitter, and the Kimberbell blank tote. And the nice thing about embroidery blanks, if you haven't worked with them before, is that they come like this is the tote bag, and it comes all ready to go except that it's open and you can stitch on it flat and then sew it together when it's done. So you don't have to take it apart before you work on it. So there are going to be 12 of these this year, one a month. We're starting with January and we'll see how it goes. But this one's a lot of fun and I hope you enjoy it. So out of the kit, I'm going to take also, there should be a piece of sticky stabilizer, and it's got kind of a waxy side, slick side, and then the stabilizers, it's like a tearaway stabilizer on the back. And that's what we're going to use for our stabilizer. I'm going to set this kit aside, and we'll use, I've already cut some pieces up. So what I will say is let's do a little bit of cutting before we get started. On your pistachio felt, this is polyester embroidery felt. It's washable and it will stand up to your stitching. I need you to cut, and your cutting list is in a file that I will send you, or will have sent you, hopefully by the time you watch this video. If you didn't get your kit from us and you're watching this video, wherever you got the tote, you'll need to get the files from that place. So if it's from us, in your kit there should have been a card where you can email me and ask for the files for this project. One of those files is going to be the instructions for the embroidery project, and that's the one we're doing today. And on the materials needed list, there's a place where you can see what sizes you need to cut your felt to. So for the pistachio embroidery felt, I'm making the 8 by 12 inch size. There's also a 5 by 7 inch size, so you want to use the 5 by 7 column to cut your pieces out according to that size, or the 8 by 12 column. So I'm going to be talking about the larger one throughout this project, but if you're doing the 5 by 7, just refer to the other measurements. So in your pistachio embroidery felt, I've already cut on this one 2 pieces that are 2.5 by 6 inches each. So you'll want to cut those, and you'll have some nice embroidery felt left over for another project, or if you want to make another one. So I'll set that over here. Those are ready to go. You also have a buttermilk felt, and you're going to use most of that one. This is what I had left over. Out of that, you need to cut, for the larger one, a piece that's 6.5 by 11 and a piece that's 9 by 12. One's going to be a pocket and one's going to be the applique fabric that will go on the front. Okay, then you should also have a couple of fabric scraps, a pink and a blue one. And they are 2 5-inch squares. You need to cut the fabric one is the pink. That's for the flowers. Oh, sorry, backwards. Fabric one is the blue for the flowers. And we're going to cut that into a 2.5 inch wide pieces. So I'll just do that real quick. And it'll be slightly bigger at 5 inches instead of 4 inches, but that's okay. We're not going to cut it down because you don't really need to. And then I'm going to cut this one also 2.5 by 3. I'm just going to cut it in half, and those are ready to go too. So that should be about all the cutting that you need to do. The next thing I'm going to do is hoop my stabilizer. I'm going to be using the Husqvarna Viking Epic 2, so it's got a really large hoop. And my stabilizer is just a little bit narrow for this, but I've tried it and it will work. So what you want to do when you're hooping sticky stabilizer is the waxy paper needs to be on top. So I'm going to put that in my hoop with the paper side, waxy paper side up. And see, I think this will work just fine. My hoop's got some edges that'll hold that stabilizer in for me. And you might have to kind of push it down a little bit to get it in there. That paper is kind of stiff. So you might have to mangle it just a little bit to get it in there. And I try to use the palms of my hands to push down. So there we go. Now I've got it in. I'm going to tighten that up and get it steady. Okay. Now what we have to do before we start stitching is take off the waxy part of the stabilizer. So I usually use my seam ripper for this, and I just cut lightly, score the paper in an X. They show in the instructions, they go around the hoop. I don't know, I've just always done it this way and it works pretty well for me. You get my seam ripper in there, and you just pull away these sections of this paper, waxy paper. And what's left behind is a sticky, tacky piece of stabilizer. And we're not actually going to put the tote bag in the hoop. We're just going to stick it to this sticky stabilizer. There we go. So get that out of the way. All right. Now, I'm going to turn to, if you want to follow along with the handout, I'm going to turn to page 4. And I think it's very well organized. The instructions are very clear. So it's a 4-part project, and the first part we're going to do is center the tote. And so what we're going to do is take this tote and fold it so that with the long edges together, like this, fold it in half so that the wrong side is out. And then we're going to press along that fold so it's nice and tight. Good, I got some steam going. So try to get it, I'm trying to get it nice and straight and get those edges lined up. Okay, there we go. Now I'm just going to press this fold. And what we're going to do is find the spot where we're going to center the design. That's what this is all about. So I'm going to get this fold pressed. And then we're going to measure down 6 inches from the top of the tote. So from either handle, we're going to measure down 6 inches. And I've got this nice little ruler that's actually a 6-inch ruler. And some marking chalk. You can use whatever you like. I like these clover, can't think what they're called anymore, but they've got a nice little chalk there, and it shows up really well. So I marked 6 inches down, and then I'm going to mark that point with she used a straight pin. I used a chalk mark, but I'll put the straight pin in there too. So because I'm left-handed, mine's going to go the opposite direction of hers, but that's okay. Now we're going to fold this piece down we're going to keep this center fold still there, and I'm going to fold this down where we put that mark or where we put the pin, and then I'm going to press that fold and remove the pin. So this is going to end up being the front of my bag. Now I'm going to take my hoop and the tote bag over to my embroidery machine, and I'll show you what comes next. Okay, so we are on page 5 of the instructions of the handout right now, and they have a different way of centering the design than I'm going to show you. There's supposed to be a centering crosshairs embroidery file, but that didn't come on my CD. So I'm going to show you how I would do it anyway without that file. So I'm going to go ahead and load my design. This is the Designer Epic 2 from Husqvarna Viking again, and I saved this file at home to the cloud storage, and so when I turned the machine on, it's here, and I've got lots of files here, so let me get there. And I'm going to use the 8x12 again, that file. So I just touch and hold it, and it loads it onto the screen. And I'm going to change my hoop size because I'm using the bigger 360 by 260 hoop. Now what we need to do is center this design on the tote bag, and I'm going to use the creases that we pressed into this earlier. This is going to be the center of my design. So I can use design positioning on the Epic to do this. And if your machine has a way for you to do that, you can do it that way, or you can, I'm going to try to get the file and so that I can send it out to people, or I will make one or the other. And if you want to use the centering file for that, you can do that. It's up to you. So I'm going to make sure that the top handle of the tote bag is to the right of my hoop. But before I do that, I need to go into stitch out mode, and I'm going to leave everything set for the defaults. Put my hoop in the embroidery arm, and on the Designer Epic, I'm just going to get rid of the colors for right now so you can see the design. On the Epic 2, design positioning is in a little flower down here at the bottom of the screen, so I'm going to touch that. And then there are 4 different options down here. I'm going to choose option number 1. That's going to let me place the marker where I want that I want to use to line up with. So I'm going to choose the center of the design, and then I'm going to choose number 2. And now I can move, if I need to, I can move it around. But now my needle is actually in the center of the design. So what I can do is take my tote bag and just line it up so that the center right in there of the folds right there is right under my needle. And one advantage to doing things the way that with that centering file is that you can actually get it lined up horizontally as well as vertically, but I'll show you, we can double check that with our hoop too. So all is not lost, even though I don't have the file. And I'm going to move that down just a tad. And when I'm happy that my needle's coming down close enough to center for me, then I can smooth this out. Now on the right side of my hoop, this is the center point of my hoop, that little piece, and I feel like my fold is on that pretty well. And I'm just going to lift this other side up and make sure that the fold is kind of lining up with this other center mark on my hoop, and I'm happy with that. So now that I'm feeling pretty good that it's all kind of lining up well, I'm going to smooth this out onto the stabilizer so that we don't have this big wrinkle over here. And I'm going to try to do that without moving it around too much. And it does take a little bit of work. Excuse me if my arms get in the way. But I think I've just about got it. Kind of smooth it out nicely. And that fold will go away as we stitch over it anyway, so I don't think we need to worry about that. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty good about where that is. So I'm going to go ahead and go back into stitch out mode. And going back to my instructions, I'm just going to make sure my thread doesn't come out of the needle. We load the design. The next thing she has you do, this is for later, is your vinyl that came in your kit. It's got a plastic covering over that, over the glitter. You're going to want to peel that heavy plastic away from the glitter, and it's kind of sticky. You can just set that aside. We won't use that anymore. You can put it in the trash. And now your vinyl will be ready when we're ready to stitch that. Okay, so the first stitch color for machine applique, in this case, is going to be a placement stitch. So when you're working with in the hoop applique, usually there's a placement stitch, a tack down stitch, and then you trim, and then it will do whatever finishing comes after that. And those are all indicated by separate color changes. So we are actually now in part 2, we're going to be working on the sparkle design. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch color number 1. Just press start, stop on my machine. And what it's going to do is stitch the placement stitches for the leaves. So when it stops stitching, we'll use the green felt that you cut earlier and lay that over where the placement lines are. So this is the fun part of machine embroidery. You just get to watch it. Watch it do all this hard work you would have to do if you were doing the sewing version. You would cut all these little pieces out, stitch them all down. It just takes a lot more work and a lot more time. So I love doing machine embroidery for this kind of thing because it looks so professional, and it goes much more quickly than if you were going to do it on your own. Since my hoop's kind of moving around, I will go ahead and trim that little piece of thread. Now I'm doing this in green, which is going to be the same color of green I'm going to use for the details later on the leaves. But if you want to use something lighter or darker that shows up better, that's fine. The color choices here are really kind of all up to you when it comes to thread colors. I'll show you what I'm using, and you can make your own decisions. That's the other fun thing about this. Okay, so the placement stitches for the leaves are all done. So now I'm going to lay my green felt on top of those placement stitches, completely covering them up. And in your kit you should also have some of this Kimberbell embroidery tape. It's I used to use painter's tape for this, and it worked just fine, but this is lighter and sticks a little bit better, I think, than painter's tape does. So I'm just going to stick some of that down to hold that felt in place while it starts stitching. And you can do this as securely as you want. Sometimes I'll confess, sometimes I don't even put tape on, but since we're going to do this the right way, I'll put the tape on. All right, so the next thing it's going to stitch, I'm going to go ahead and stitch the next color, and it's going to stitch the tack down stitches. So we'll let it do its thing. Okay, so it's done the tack down stitches for me, and now I'm going to take my hoop off the machine. One thing you could do with this machine is actually move the hoop to the trim position, and what it does is it moves it out of the way of, moves it out from under the head and the arm of the machine so you can get to it. But I know with these little pieces I'm going to need to kind of get in and around, so I'm going to actually take the hoop off the machine and go over to my table, put it on a flat surface. You don't ever want to do this on your lap, because what can happen, especially with a situation like this where we're using the sticky stabilizer, is if you move the stabilizer around, things might not line up correctly, and that would not be a good thing. So I'm going to trim my bobbin thread here and move over to the table. Okay, so now I'm ready to trim, and I like to use these little scissors from Inspira. They're embroidery scissors, and they're a little bit curved up, and they've got a nice sharp point on them. So the curve makes it so that it's not so easy to cut the underlying fabric. So I'm going to take the tape off, and I might actually reuse that in a minute. So I'm just going to put it here on my hoop. And then I'll take my little scissors and I pull the fabric, the applique fabric that I'm going to cut away. I kind of pull that up so I can get access, get a little closer to the stitches that way. And I'm going to get in here and cut as close as I can. Now on some of these, so I'm going to cut these 3 because they're pretty individual. But over here where they're kind of close together, I'm actually probably just going to leave this bottom part uncut. I'll show you that in a minute. So in here, the nice thing about these sharp little scissors is I can get that point in there and trim away from the, trim that extra fabric away from the stitches. I also keep a pair of tweezers handy. I use these a lot, and especially in applique like this where there are smaller pieces that I have trouble grabbing with my fingers. I just use my tweezers and pull those up, and then I can get in there and trim a little more closely and make it a little bit neater. I don't quite like that piece of fuzz hanging off there. You can cut these as precisely or as non-precisely as you like. It's really kind of up to you. It's your taste. This is a raw edge applique, so it's going to have a raw edge anyway, and sometimes it's nice to leave a little bit extra around it. It's really just kind of up to you and what you like, your taste. So I'm going to get a little closer in here. And that one I think I might leave. It gets really close right there. So I can get in there with these little scissors, but I did this on my practice one and left that space together, and it looked just fine. So I was kind of happy with that. I didn't spend a lot of time getting in there and cutting that off. And then I'm going to kind of do the same thing. I'm going to cut around those leaves. And then I'm going to get the center. Sorry, I know you probably can't see what I'm going to do. What I'm doing here. I'm going to cut this away. Okay, I'm going to cut this a little closer to the center here and trim here, but then I'm going to leave most of the rest of that just as it is. There's going to be a little more detail stitched on it anyway. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other piece. Save my tape. As long as it's sticky, I'll keep using it. Get that out of there. Get a little closer in here. And if I need to, I will move my hoop around to get better access. Try to get my hand out of the way again. And trim that away. I'm going to cut that a little bit away and cut that. And I think for me, that's as close as I'm going to get. So I'm going to take this back over to the machine now and do the detail stitching, which is next. Okie doke. So I'm going to put my hoop back on my machine. And we're ready now to do stitch color change number 3. And I left my instructions over there, but I remember that this is a detail, so it's going to fill in some details on the leaves themselves. So we'll let that go. Now, one of the things I like about the Designer Epic 2 is that it actually has apps that work with it, and when the machine is stitching for a while and I know I don't need to be right there, there's actually an app that will send a text to my phone when I need to change the thread color, or if the thread breaks or something like that, if I'm running out of bobbin thread, that kind of thing. So if I want to go off and do something else while it's stitching, it'll let me know if the machine needs some attention. So for example, this is my cell phone, and I got a text message a few minutes ago that the designer applique, that I needed to change the thread. And so it's really nice to get those notifications. All right, so the next color is change. I'm actually going to leave the green in because it's going to do some sprigs of green around the leaves. So we'll just go ahead and let that stitch. Whoa, I need to stop it for a minute. So I want to tell you what's going on here. The reason I've had to stop this is that the handle on my tote bag over here got caught on the end of my arm. So you need to kind of watch out for that, because that could pull that out of registration or out of calibration. So I think I got it before that happened. So we're going to go ahead and sew. Those are some of the things you have to look out for when you're doing machine embroidery. Okay, so if you're following along with the instructions, we just completed step 4, which corresponded with color change 4. Just finished that one. We're getting ready for number 6 on the, if it gets a little confusing sometimes, so number 6 in the instructions is actually going to be step number 5. Step number 5 corresponds with color change number 5, okay? So different companies do their instructions a little bit differently for in the hoop projects and for things like machine applique, in the hoop applique. So it's a good idea to try to understand kind of what they're referring to here. So she's got a color change or a piece of a spool here that indicates that this color change is step number 5. And we're going to change the thread to the flowers placement line. I'm actually going to change colors this time. I like to match the color of my placement line, if it's not going to show, to the color that I'm going to stitch on top. That way I don't forget to change it, because I've done that. Stitched it in the wrong color. Okay, so I'm going to use a dark blue thread because the flowers we're using the dark blue fabric. So I'm just going to thread my machine, And one of the things I love about the Epic too is it's got this automatic threader. So I just feed the thread in through there, push a button, and it threads the needle for me, which is very nice. Okay, so now I'm ready. I'm going to touch Start Stop on my machine and let it stitch the placement line. Okay, so the placement lines are stitched. Now I'm going to take the right side of my fabric and place that up, and I'm just going to place those pieces of blue fabric on the in the hoop, covering up those placement stitches. And I'm going to go ahead and reuse my tape. I think it'll work again. And put this one on this side. That felt may make it not last quite as long because it picks up some of the felt, the tape picks up some of the felt, but that's okay. All right, and now I am ready to do the tack down stitches. So I'm going to start my machine, and we're on color change number 6. Okay, so the tack down stitches are done. So I'm going to do what I did the last time and take my hoop off the machine and go trim around those little flowers. Okay, so I'm going to take the tape off, just like I did before. I'll see if I can make it last for another round. It's getting kind of non-sticky. So we may have to put some, I think it's probably done. So we'll just set that aside and I'll get some more out for the next one. And then I'm just going to take my little scissors and trim around my fabric again, or trim around the stitches again. And like I said before, you can be as neat or as not neat as you choose. I tend to try to get in pretty close. But on this one, I found that kind of a more rustic look wasn't too bad. So. One thing you want to try to avoid is you want to avoid actually cutting the stitches, because that can make it so that your applique will come out. And I didn't do this time, and but a lot of times what I will do with this is put some fusible web on the back of my fabric before I stitch it down, let it stitch, cut it away, and then after the whole thing's done, I'll press that fusible web so it sticks, especially with this raw edge applique, it'll stick and help keep that fabric there so it doesn't come out later. This has enough stitching on top of it that I decided I didn't need to do that, but there probably will be a piece of fusible web in your kit if you do want to do that. Okay, and then I had a little thread kind of hanging out there I'm going to trim. And okay, now I'm ready to go back to the machine again. We are ready now on the handout for step 7, or section 7, I guess. We've trimmed the fabric, and this corresponds with step 7, color change 7. And what I'm going to do is change my thread to stitch the berries placement line. And I'm using a dark thread because I think that's going to show up nicely after the when it's doing the detail stitching around it, the tack down and so on. So get it threaded again and we'll be ready to go. Okay, and I'm going to do the berries placement stitch now. Okay, so the placement stitch for the berries is done. So now I'm going to take the pink fabric, got a little bit of pink grunge going on there, and lay that up over all of the placement stitches for the berries. And I pulled off some more tape. We're going to tape that down. Try not to tape my thread down. And I know that it's not going to stitch over here, so even though I've got that tape hanging over there, I think it'll be fine. And then I'm going to press start stop, and it's going to do the tack down stitches again. Okay, so the placement stitches are done. I'm going to take the hoop out again and go trim around my little berries, just like we did with the other two steps. Okay, I'm going to take the tape off. Okay, there we go. That stuck pretty well. And get my scissors out and trim those little berries. These I do kind of want to get all the way around them. They're a little more distinct, so I'm going to really use those little pointy tips of the scissors to get in there. And we'll trim around this one. I work in an apron at the stores, and sometimes when I'm at home, I lay things down and can't find them. So the aprons are pretty handy, and I've started wearing them at home too. All right, I'm going to grab this little piece with my tweezers, and you can see I'm not being real neat about my trimming, but like I said, I think it kind of looks cute that way. Okay, so that's trimmed pretty well. I am going to cut that a little bit more. Another thing that's really handy to have that I don't have right here with me now is lint roller, so you can get some of those little pieces off. I'm not going to worry about it right now, but those threads that are kind of stray, you can get those off while you're working. So again, if you're following along with the handout, we're ready for step number 9. We're on page 7, section number 8. And step number 9, again, corresponds, if you're new to this, corresponds with color change number 9 on the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that. It's just a little tiny detail stitch on the berries. Okay, those were the details on the berries. Next, we're going to stitch the flower detail, and I'm going to use a kind of a gold color for that. You can again use whatever color you think would look nice. So get my thread threaded. And these are kind of like the stamens and the flowers, I think. And here we go. That detail's done, so the next color change is for the stems for the flowers. So I'm going to go back to my green and load that up. And let that stitch. Okay, so the next color change is going to be the placement line for this banner. I'm going to get the colors out of the way here. So it's going to be the banner part this time. And I'm going to use, I'm actually going to stitch the outline of the banner with some black thread. So I'm going to get my black thread and just use that as the placement color. And so on the handout, if you're following along, we're actually ready for section 9. This is going to be color change 12, or step number 12, right there. So I'm going to go ahead and let it stitch the placement line for the banner. And while it's doing that, I'm going to get my 6 by 12 or 6.5 by 11 inch piece of buttermilk felt out. And that's what we're going to use for the applique for the next part. Okay, so we are to color change number 13, and this is going to be the tack down stitch for the banner. So I'm going to make sure that my felt is covering up the entire all of those placement lines, and then I'm going to press start stop and let it stitch the tack down stitches. That was step number 13, color change number 13. So I need to trim the felt away. So I'm going to once again take my hoop off the machine, go over to a flat surface and trim the felt. Okay. So some of you may have noticed, if you were watching closely, that I didn't put tape on this piece. The felt kind of sticks pretty well, so I forgot to put it on, but honestly, with a piece this size, I probably wouldn't always feel like I needed to tape it anyway. So we're going to trim around the banner. My scissors don't want to cut that way, so go around. Excuse my hands. I'm going to get a little tighter in there, I think, than I did on the flowers anyway. Get that trimmed up. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to go back to the machine, and the next thing we're going to stitch is the placement lines for the glitter vinyl that's going to go up here. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the black thread in because I know it's going to cover that up completely. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch color number 14, which is the word sparkle. Well, as you can see, we've got the placement lines for the letters for the word sparkle. So we're going to take the glitter vinyl. Let me get this thread off of there. Okay, we're going to take the glitter vinyl now and place it on top of all those placement lines, making sure you cover everything up. Now, see, this kind of slips around, so this is where I really think that the tape is necessary. So I'm going to tape actually both sides of this vinyl so it will stay down. And then I've decided to use black for the tack down stitches for this. So I'm going to leave my black thread in there, and then I'm going to press start and let it stitch the tack down. Alright, so the tack down stitches are done. Some of you may notice that I didn't quite get my glitter covering my placement stitches, so a little bit of the E is not going to be there, but that's okay. I think I can live with that. So I'm going to take this off the machine. If you wanted to fix that, you could probably cut a little piece of it off, cover that back up, and go back over just that section, but I'm not going to bother to do that. Okay, so I'm going to go back over to the table and trim my letters out. So the tape comes off so I can get to those letters, and I think we're done with the applique, but I'm going to go ahead and use my little scissors, and I found the last time I did this that it went a lot quicker if I just cut straight across the top of and the bottom of the letters, and then got in and cut the detail out a little more carefully. So this saved me a little bit of time. Okay, so now we're just going to get in and cut as close as we can to those threads without cutting them. And while we're doing that, I'm actually going to get my iron heated up. It shuts itself off, so I want to make sure that's ready when I'm done. This is called heat transfer vinyl, and we get ours from a company called Stahl's. It's professional quality vinyl, so it's softer. It's going to last a little bit longer than some other brands, I think. So that's why we chose to carry it. So once I'm done trimming, what we're going to do is go over to the iron. You always, always, always want to use a pressing cloth when you're trimming or when you're pressing vinyl, any kind of glitter or any other kind of vinyl with your iron, because you don't want it to get onto your iron. I'll show you what I mean in just a minute, and we're actually going to leave it in the hoop when we do that pressing. So you don't want to take the design out of the hoop until you're completely done, because if you do, it can be almost impossible to get it all lined up again. So I'm going to get in here with these little tips. I might need my tweezers for some help in there. And again, you don't want to cut the thread. Get in here. And you also don't want to cut the fabric underneath, so it's a little bit delicate. I can make that just a little bit cleaner. There we go. And we're going to get this curve a little bit better. And you also, when you go to put the iron down and fuse that down, you don't want to have any little pieces of glitter floating around, because they'll get fused down wherever they are. Okay, now getting into these spots where there's where it's completely enclosed, these I love these tweezers for this because they've got a very sharp point. So I actually use that to kind of get into that glitter and cut into the vinyl. Then I can get my scissors in there and trim around. So lots of companies make these pointy tweezers, and they're very useful for this. Get a little closer. Again, this design kind of has a rustic feel, so if you don't get it all trimmed away, I think it still looks pretty good. Trim that up. And this is a spot where I'm going to stick my tweezers in there and cut that vinyl away so I can get the scissors in. So you can see with these smaller areas, your scissors really make a big difference, and having a good quality pair of scissors really makes this a lot easier. And I'll be honest, I wasn't real sure I wanted to use them on the vinyl because I think it's probably going to dull them a little bit, but they can be sharpened. So I will probably have one of the guys sharpen my scissors for me when we're done. And get in here and poke a hole in this area of the pea. I'm getting a little bit of the felt, so I don't want to get too much of that. There, try to get my scissors there. And we're going to trim the rest of this around the S out of the way. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is move my hoop over to the ironing surface, and I'm just going to put the whole thing on here. And like I said before, it's very important to use a pressing cloth for this. I'm actually using a Teflon pressing sheet. You can use, at home I use a pair of old pajama pants because that's what I have. I haven't managed to get one of these home yet. So you want to hold your iron down. I turned the steam off, and you want to hold it for, I think she said 15 to 30 seconds on each section. I didn't count, so we're just going to kind of guess. And I usually press down with the iron too, not just rest it on there. So I'm using my other hand to press down a little bit. And then I'd usually go back over just to make sure. Okay, so that should be all fused down. And you can see, I can tell there's a little piece missing, but most people will never notice that, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. All right, so we're going to go back to the machine, and I believe the next step is to stitch the lettering down here, the Like You Mean It letters. So I am actually, for my letters, Like You Mean It, we're on, let's see, we're on color change number 16, so this is the next to the last one. So I'm going to use a metallic thread for this to kind of, so it sparkles a little bit like the vinyl. It's a gold metallic thread. Boy, I really got it around there too. What I'm going to do though, one of the things I've learned about using specialty threads like this is, especially with metallic threads, a thread net will help. So that's what I have in this hand. This is called a thread net. It's just a some kind of plastic netting. Most of our machines come with these, but we also have them available separately for purchase if you don't have one. I'm going to take the end of my thread and pull it through the thread net, and then I'm going to put the net over the metallic thread, and with this spool I kind of let it wrap around the bottom, because otherwise, and it may come off anyway, it'll come off. It's also nice, the Epic's got this tall thread tower guide, which kind of helps straighten this metallic thread out. What can happen with it is as it comes off the spool, it can get kinked up and it causes it to get caught and break. So the thread net kind of helps keep it from twisting too much. And be really careful with your threading. Make sure you get it into your tension assembly there. I'm going to go ahead and thread it. And then the other thing I do with almost any kind of specialty, oh, it came out of the guide. So I'm going to get my thread back in that guide. So see, it just behaves a little bit differently than regular thread. And okay, so now I've got it in there. The other thing I do with metallic thread is actually slow my speed down quite a bit. So I'm going to go down, not all the way to the bottom, but like the next to the bottom lowest speed. And we're just going to let this stitch. Okay, so I didn't have a single thread break. No tears. The thread nets are really wonderful things, and slowing your machine down is really important too. But I'm going to speed it back up for this last color change. And the last thing we're going to stitch, this is color number 17, is the eyelets that we're going to use to put the fairy lights in. So I'm matching my thread to as close as I could to the tote bag so that the stitching doesn't show up so much on this. Get it threaded and back to full speed. Here we go. Okay, so I'm running out of bobbin thread. I'm going to go ahead and stitch for a little bit longer. Let's see. I might be able to get the rest of them stitched without having to change thread, bobbin thread. I found I can usually get 500 to 1,000 more stitches out of my bobbin, and that's right about where we are. Yay, I made it. And okay, the embroidery part of the project is finished. So I'm going to take the hoop off of the machine, and we're going to go over and do some work at the table again. So I'm going to go ahead and take the project out of the embroidery hoop and set that out of the way. And the next thing we're going to do is take off the excess stabilizer. So you can see it kind of sticks, but I'm just going to pull it away. And, excuse me. Sometimes people will ask me how much stabilizer they should leave in the project, or should they try to get all of this out. Actually, it's probably better to leave more of the stabilizer in if you can, because it just kind of helps keep the fabric around the stitches stable. That's why they call it stabilizer, I guess. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that in. Now, I'm turning the page. In the handout, we are now to page 9, and we need to open up these little eyelets so that we can get the fairy lights in there. So I'm going to go back to my scissors and use them to kind of poke a hole through the eyelet. And I want to get my point in there as far as I can to kind of open that up, because the eyelets do take a little space. And I did find when I did this before that that really wasn't quite enough. So I'm going to grab some of this fabric in the middle and just cut a little bit of it out for each one. So this is going to take a little bit of time, and I kind of trim my threads off as I go around here. So I'm going to poke a hole. That one looked like I don't think I need to cut, so that's good. Take the scissors and poke a nice hole in there. Try not to cut your stitches. Just get right in there. Okay. Okay, come on, get in there. Oh, well, that explains that. I tried to go through double the tote bag. I think I managed. I don't think I got a hole in it where I didn't want one, but got to watch out for that kind of thing too, I guess. Almost done with this part, I think. Okay, so I at least did the first pass there. So the next thing you want to do in your kit, you also got a package of fairy lights. There are 2 sets in here. You're only going to use one for this project, so you could actually make another one for a friend or something if you wanted to. Okay, and they come kind of wound around themselves, so you want to untwist them like that. This is like a little wire, and they're bendable. I actually used some of these to turn a non-lit wreath at Christmas time into a lit wreath, so that was kind of fun. It's another way to use them. So in the instructions, it tells you to take the wire and kind of make a little loop like that. And you want to use the one that's closest to the controller. You want to start with that. And I'm going to start here towards the bottom, I think. And you poke that fairy light through. And then what I did was just kind of pull on the light itself, straighten out the wire a little bit, and then twist. So it'll stay there. And then you just go all the way around the design. You take the next one, make a loop next to the fairy light, take it through the hole, pull the light part through to the front, and this is the light part right here. I'm going to pull that out and come back into the back and pull it back in a little bit. Twist it so it will stay on the outside, and then just keep going. Whoops, I got a little too far away. Let's try this one. There we go. Nope. Okay, on this one I'm going to have to trim a little bit, I think. Oops, I know I'm touching that microphone. What did I do with my scissors? Stuck them in my pocket. I don't usually do that. So I'm going to trim some thread away here so that fairy light can get through. It's just a little too thick, right? And I don't want to trim the light at the wire either, so be careful if you're doing this with it in there. So I'm just going to clip those threads. There we go. Now I got that one through. So I can pull the wire from the back and twist this one so it stays. And keep going. Yeah, that one too. It's not quite big enough. There we go. And we'll get those so that they'll stay in a little bit better here in a minute. Just what I ended up doing is I go back and twist a little bit these ends so they kind of twist on each other and hold each other down. Oh, that one went right through. Yay. Pull it through. Get that, there we go. Twist it around a little so it'll stay. And keep going. Okay, that came through. Well, I can't get that one. It's getting caught on some threads here. There we go. Okay. There we go. They kind of have a mind of their own. You have to finagle with them just a little bit. Okay. Okay, so I'm just grabbing the light, trying to pull those wires back through, and then twisting. Okay, then we're going to twist it. Another use I've seen made of the fairy lights is if you do freestanding lace, you can actually wind these in among the freestanding lace when you're done, and it lights up whatever you've made with that, which is kind of cool. Just a few more. Nope, not pulling the right end. Here, let's see. There we go. This is where if we were having an in-person class, we could sit and chat and enjoy each other's company a little bit, but things being what they are, you just get to listen to me rattle on. Okay, so 2 more. I think I'm going to have to cut that one. A few threads there. Should be a little better. There we go. And one left, just one tiny little one left. Yeah, I can tell I didn't punch these quite as hard. Yeah, that should do it. There. This one has just a little tiny bit of an end on it, but I'm just going to leave it hanging out. And then, like I said before, I go back and kind of twist these together and flatten them out a little bit so that hopefully they'll stay in place a little better. And you can kind of play around with that. But I think they're okay for now. Well, yeah. I'm going to go ahead and do just a little bit more. So we're going to twist them around each other on the back. And I've got 1 or 2 that are sticking out too far, so let's fix that. You don't want to probably twist them too much. I don't know how much bending they can take before they stop working, but you get the idea. So I've got a little bit more work to do on mine, but let's just light it up because it's fun. Let's get that piece in. Okay, that's a little better. So now, like a lot of things that come with batteries, there's a little plastic tab that sticks out here. It's already got a battery in it. So you pull that out, and there's a little black switch here. You flip the switch, and looky there, you can sparkle. Okay. So that's the embroidery part, the decorative part. Now we've got to put the thing together. So can't really carry the tote around quite the way it is. There's another piece of felt that we cut earlier that they call the pocket, okay? And it's going to cover up the back of all that stitching. And I'm not going to glue it right now because I don't want us to have to wait for the glue to dry. But we're going to use fabric glue, and I like to use Aleene's No-Sew fabric glue. And what you do is you put glue around 3 sides of the pocket, and then you'll turn that over and press it down and let the glue dry before you do the next part. I'm going to leave mine out and do that later so I can show you how to put the tote bag together. I just have one long thread I'm going to trim here. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to go on to page 10. This is part 4, finishing the tote. And we're going to fold the tote in half with the right sides together. This time, instead of lengthwise, we're going to do it so that the handles line up together like this. And you can press the bottom seam. You do not want to press the fairy lights. I think the heat would probably ruin them, so try to keep your iron away from that. I'm going to press that, and then I'll get my machine set up for sewing, and we'll finish the tote off. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch the side seams on the tote bag. And we're going to do that with a 1/2 inch seam. And I just happen to have a 1/2 inch mark here on my stitch plate. Just make sure that's lined up. Okay. Oh, I forgot to mention that message that came up on my screen there for a minute was telling me to engage the integrated dual feed. The Epic 2 comes with a built-in walking foot, so in order to engage it, all you have to do is pull it down, and you're ready to go. And what that does is it helps pull the top fabric and the bottom fabric through at the same time. And just, you get more even stitching, and quilters are really familiar with it for working with multiple layers of fabric. It just helps pull everything through together. So we're just going to finish these side seams. I just did a reverse to kind of reinforce those seams at the top and the bottom because they usually get a little more wear and tear. And now I'm going to do this other side. And I like to stop with my needle down so that the fabric doesn't move around on me. And again, I'm just going to do a little reverse and cut. Now, if you want, you can stop there, but we're going to box the corners, and I'm going to show you how to do that. That's an optional step. We're going to go back over to the table. And so what boxing the corners does, it gives a little bit more shape to your tote. So what I do is pull the sides apart like that, kind of get them apart from each other. And part of the reason we press this seam here is so that we can line, what we want to do is line up this seam with that pressing line right there. Kind of flatten that out, and so my actual seam line right there is lined up with that fold. If I can get it open. Okay, kind of like that. Now, we can press that, and that's what the instructions say to do. So I'm going to press that open, or in position. And then I'm going to take my little ruler. You can use a big ruler if you want, but I'm going to use my little one. And I'm going to measure in 1.25 inches. So from the point, there's about 1.25 inches. I'm going to make a mark there with my chalk. And I would usually pin this too, just so it doesn't get away from me before I get to the machine. Okay, and then I'm going to turn it around and do the other corner the same way. So I'm going to open it out, line that seam up with the fold that we pressed before, press that open. We're going to measure 1.25 inches in, mark it, try to get it somewhat straight, and put a pin in. And then we're going to go back to the machine and stitch along the line that we marked. So now I'm just going to stitch across this line. I made a few different ones, so I'm not sure which one's actually, I think this one is probably the most straight. So I'm just going to stitch along that, right on top of that line. And then because it's at the bottom of the tote and it's a corner, I'm actually just going to back stitch all the way across again. And then cut. And then I'm going to turn it around and do the other corner exactly the same way. And here I'm going to get my seam up under my foot. There we go. And back stitch all the way across. Cut my thread. And then I'm going to go back to the table and trim about 1/4 inch away from that seam. I'm just going to cut that off, that point off, and do the same thing on the other corner. And guess what? I get to turn it right side out. So I'm going to turn those corners out. I kind of just press them in with my fingers, open them up. And looky there, we have a tote bag. And it sparkles. So even if you're not feeling very sparkly that day, you can turn your little sparkle lights on and feel a little, maybe it'll cheer you up. So anyway, happy sewing. I hope you enjoy the project. And you don't just have to stitch it on this tote bag. You can actually use this design on anything. So you could even wear a shirt with lights sparkling on it if you wanted to. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.